I hope you are all here. You haven't gone away. And this is the second session of Freedom Convention 2020. And the title of the session is Collapse of Rule of Law. And the theme of this year, the Freedom Convention 2020, is Grave Human Rights Violations in Turkey, organized by Advocates of Silence Turkey, AST. And we will host 5 panel sessions. This one is the second one with, ongoing human rights violations will be discussed by 30 prominent experts and activists. And this panel session will have a great moderator, Honorable David Kilger, who is a human rights activist, author, former lawyer, and Canadian politician. And since he'll be the boss of this panel, I'm gonna leave the floor to you, and good luck. Thank you everyone for joining us. I would like to thank all the speakers here that you participated in this panel on behalf of Advocates of Silence Turkey.
Well, thank you very much, Hafsa. It just occurred to me you should stay on to be the moderator of the panel, but if you insist, we will speak in alphabetical order, which means that our first speaker is going to be Alp Aslan Dogan. He's the executive director of the Alliance for Shared Values, and Alp, you have 8 to 10 minutes. Please continue.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. I congratulate Advocates for Silence Turkey for bringing this group together. As you see in the list, there are people of so many different backgrounds. I think so many people coming together for the rule of law and democracy and human rights in Turkey. I think it's a great achievement. And I also want to thank the participants for joining this event. I will talk about the collapse of rule of law, and this collapse, of course, affected Hizmet movement, maybe arguably the most, along with the Kurds and the journalists and other groups in Turkey. So I'd like to note that Hizmet participants now are considered as a group persecuted by Turkish government because of their group affiliation or political view, and therefore they are considered as eligible for asylum by many countries, including Norway, the UK, Germany, Canada, Australia, and the United States, among others. Now, in my comments, I want to touch briefly first about the mechanics of the collapse of the rule of law, and then what I think are some of the factors that enabled this outcome. So first about the mechanics of the collapse, and I want to share a graphic that hopefully will help you better understand my points. So the subjugation of the judiciary and the turning of the judiciary into a punitive instrument, punitive weapon, it's a pillar of Erdogan's strategy of bringing the major power centers under his control. Now, Turkish judiciary, of course, has not been at the top of its game. It has not been one of the exemplary judiciaries in the past. It did suffer from bias and the lack of independence and political influence in the past. But what is unique about the last several years is the turning of this judiciary into a punitive instrument in a very systematic way by a civilian government. In the past, the military strongly affected the judiciary, and especially journalists suffered from this in the 90s especially, and Dr. Karakash is very familiar, and our previous panelists in the previous panel are very familiar with that. Many journalists spent time going from court to court to defend themselves against prosecutors who were motivated by the military. But the use of the judiciary as a punitive instrument by the elected government is something new in Turkish history. This is unprecedented. So mechanically, in this process, what happened was in the first stage, or the preparation stage, after the corruption probes of December 2013, Erdogan began using the language of judicial coup, enemies of state, and traitors. So his argument was that the corruption investigation was an attempt to bring down his government, which was, of course, both technically and politically incorrect, because technically the prosecutors could not bring charges to his ministers or himself. So legally, they could not bring down the government. And politically, Turkish people all know that every government is corrupt to some degree. So they were willing to accommodate Erdogan government as long as the economy was doing good. So Erdogan's claim of judicial coup is baseless. But nevertheless, he used this campaign, PR campaign, very successfully. So this, in a way, justified the taking over of the judiciary by the political ruling government. Now, mechanically, with the law number 6524, which is dated in February 24, the Justice Minister was empowered with, within the High Council of Judges and Prosecutors to make many key appointments. Now, the Constitutional Court annulled actually this provision, but in the meantime, before it was annulled, Justice Minister made many political appointments. And then at Erdogan's direction, the AKP-dominated parliament passed laws to make arrests much easier and to consolidate arrest decisions in the hands of a carefully controlled group of judges. The previous laws required search warrants to be issued based on strong doubt, based on concrete evidence, whereas with the law number 6572, adopted in December 2014, it was only sufficient to demonstrate reasonable doubt to get a search warrant. So the first stage in the mechanical process of collapse of the rule of law was changing the laws to make arrest warrants easier. In stage 2, in June 2014, with the law number 6545, a new system of special criminal judges or criminal peace judgeships, it's almost like an oxymoron in terminology, was created for the criminal investigations, which was then used for or abused for political purposes. Instead of a large number of courts spread around the country deciding the arrest warrants, this was a much smaller number of courts with fewer judges that are deciding the arrest warrants. And whereas before it was possible to appeal an arrest warrant to a high court, with the new system now, the appeal could only be made to the same court, creating, of course, a conflict of interest, which worked against the victims and which worked in favor of the ruling party. In a report published in February 2019, International Commission of Judges concluded that these judgeships were not independent and could not withstand pressure from the political branches of the government. Now, in the third and final step, the subjugation of the judiciary was enabled by the domination of the Supreme Council of Judges and Prosecutors. Now, there was an amendment to the Turkish Constitution in September 2010, which made the determination of the members of this court, the High Council, more democratic. And at the time, many people supported this measure. Many people thought that this would be more democratic. But unfortunately, Erdogan took advantage of this amendment and did something that nobody expected. He actually made an alliance with his former enemies, in particular neo-nationalists, who had a strong presence in the Turkish judiciary. And together with Erdogan loyalists and with others whom they attracted by promising certain things, they nominated the Higher Council of Judges and Prosecutors. So this is evident, this alliance is evident in the fact that when the so-called Unity in Justice judiciary group, which was supported by Erdogan and his allies, when that won the seats, when they won the seats, both Erdogan was happy and also the leader of the Vatan Party, Doğu Perinçek, the neo-nationalist, he was also happy. Previously they were enemies, but now they are allies. So with this domination of the higher council, they were able to appoint judges or discipline judges and other members of the judiciary. So the combination of these three measures enabled turning the judiciary into a punitive weapon. Now, I want to also talk about what I think enabled this collapse of the rule of law, and why wasn't there a strong reaction from the public or from other circuits. Now, the first factor, I think, is Erdogan's clever tactic of targeting big money first. And he began doing this, and the media first. He began doing this shortly after he took power. He began going after big media institutions and transferring them to his allies. So he was able to, by the time the moves to dominate the judiciary happened in 2014, a great portion of the media was already under his control. So he was able to justify the power grab the domination of the judiciary by using this rhetoric of judicial coup, enemy of the state, traitors. And of course, he was referring to his Met participants. He was saying that these are traitors. They are allied with foreign powers who want to bring down our government. When this campaign is organized and executed across many major media institutions, people believed, at least some of the people believed, that despite the mounting evidence that corruption was real. Now, the second factor, I think, that enabled this domination of the judiciary and collapse of the rule of law without a strong reaction is it's a decades-long ideology-oriented practice of the higher judiciary and the constitutional court. The primary example of this ideologically oriented practice is preventing schoolgirls who wear the head cover from going to school all the way up to the Supreme Court, Constitutional Court. Such a practice was approved. In the words of Dr. Ergun Özbudun, the higher courts and especially the Constitutional Court acted as guardians of a militant and assertive form of secularism. This led to a significant segment of the population to continue to support AKP in the face of ongoing violations of freedom of expression, corruption, and now the assault on the judiciary. In some sense, the indifference the AKP voter base showed to the increasing authoritarianism and corruption is the result of the mindset of the AKP voters, because they were thinking for decades and decades we have been oppressed and persecuted. Now it's our time, our man is in power, so we're gonna turn a blind eye to his violations of human rights and the domination of the judiciary. And the third factor, I think, is the lack of sensitivity, the democratic sensitivities within the Turkish population. While Turkish Republic had a constitution, it had a parliament, and it had elections since the beginning of the republic, there has been little effort to inculcate the democratic culture. I was a child, I grew up in the 60s and the 70s, and our curriculum was dominated by nationalistic themes, which revered a strong leader and the nation at the expense of the individual. So from 1925 to 1950, the country was governed by a single party with an iron fist. Although in 1950, three multi-party elections were held and the opposition party won the election, the military's shadow was dark over the elected government. And sometimes this is called the military tutelage regime. And the military also staged classical kind of coups in 1960, 1971, 1980, and arguably they staged another coup in 1996 without using tanks or guns. So when you combine the lack of sensitivity about the democratic values, separation of powers, rule of law, freedom of expression, when you combine this lack of sensitivity with the fact that the Turkish economy was doing all right in 2014, you can understand that there was no strong reaction from the public to the collapse of the rule of law. So in terms of the future, you know, we all are familiar with the situation now. In terms of the future, when can we expect Turkey to return to some kind of normalcy, at least something better than this? My answer is, it is whenever the collective consciousness of Turkish people rises to the level and they say enough is enough, we will not stand by violations of universal principles of law. We deserve a better government, better judicial system. Until that happens, I don't think things will get better. And until that happens, I hope that the situation doesn't get any worse for the participants of Hizmet movement or journalists or Kurds or any other oppressed group in Turkey. Thank you.
Wow. Thank you, El, very, very much. Excellent. The next speaker is, he prefers Krish Govinder, who's an elected member of the South African Legal Practice Council, and he lives in Durban, South Africa. You have the floor.
Thank you very much. I wasn't quite sure whether I would be next in line, but I'm with you now, so I'm ready. Let me also echo the introductory words of Alf. I think this is an important event, and I must also acknowledge the brave work that the activists in Turkey and elsewhere have embarked on. It is not an easy task, and they face I'm sure, numerous threats and challenges. Let me start by saying I also bring you warm greetings from the President of the National Association of Democratic Lawyers in South Africa, Mr. Mvuso Notezi, and also all our members of our association who join everybody in solidarity in the struggle for justice and freedom in Turkey. A discussion on the importance of upholding the rule of law in Turkey is intertwined with the role and ever-growing powers of the President of Turkey. The greater the power of the President, the weaker is the strength of the rule of law until the one extinguishes the other. Turkey has a history that has filled volumes in libraries around the world. It is often seen as the umbilical cord between East and West in Europe, and is also symbolic of the great divide within the world, namely the East-West divide. I must say that Mother Africa has been squeezed into the North-South divide, and we are in between. When Constantinople fell in 1453, you see, I know a little bit of history here, Turkey became a force that reverberated throughout the centuries thereafter. It impacted on world and regional affairs in many ways, some small but more often with significant effect. In this third millennium, President Erdogan started out as a modern and progressive leader. That's what I believe. And mine, I must emphasize, is a perspective from South Africa. So bear with me if I'm being complimentary where I might not have to be. And started out, as I said, as a modern and progressive leader and shifted course over 2 presidential terms in order to deflect attention away from his questionable conduct and his strong critics. He set himself on the path towards a form of modern-day dictatorship, while strengthening his hold over a weakened and subservient parliament. Erdogan thus wields widespread power over the masses of the people via his influence over the army, intelligence, and the police services. This could only have been kept in check by a strong and independent judiciary, which sadly does not exist today. In any modern democracy, the rule of law is balanced by the one arm of the government, namely the judiciary, which acts as a guardian of all the rights of the people against the potential unjust or unfair actions of the executive and legislature, which form the other 2 arms of government. The importance of an independent judiciary cannot be emphasized enough in order to ensure a strong adherence to the rule of law. Politicians have a somewhat superficial understanding of the role of a judiciary, and most times expect the judiciary to interpret and apply the law as it is written and passed by the legislature. The strength of the judiciary, therefore, is greatly dependent on the requirements for the appointment and removal of members of the judiciary. It is difficult to find in any democratic country processes which are totally independent of and not under varying degrees of control by the executive and the legislature in respect of the appointment of judges. The more independent the processes for the appointment and removal of judges, the stronger is the rule of law. A longer discussion on this vast topic is not called for here, save to say that the role of the judiciary is crucial in the battle against unjust rule, as it is the last barrier against dictatorship and military rule. It follows that power-hungry or desperate leaders of democratic countries will seek many ways to emasculate the judiciary through different ways. History has illustrated some of the ways that this has happened, especially over the last century. The one method popularly used is a state of emergency. This is declared when there is a threat or a perceived threat to the institutions of the state and its people from either an external force or an internal threat. The events of July 15, 2016 involving a purported coup by a few members of the Turkish army, which at best can be described as worst planned, or as others might say, stage managed by Erdogan himself. The tragic consequences for hundreds of people who lost their lives by coming out into the streets set the stage for the collapse of the rule of law in Turkey. A then somewhat credible democratic government was turned into, within days, an authoritarian one. President Erdogan was able to use emergency powers to usurp the legislative and judicial powers and rule by decree. The parliament was bypassed and the judiciary rendered impotent and an extended tool of oppression. A facade of the rule of law remains today in respect of commercial and non-political legal matters. However, anyone who is deemed to be an opponent, not necessarily of the state, but of Erdogan and his pliant government, can and will be arrested and detained, and most oftentimes with assaults and torture to follow. If they are fortunate to survive the ordeal of detention, they will be charged under draconian and unjust laws as decreed by the state. When they are brought to court to be prosecuted, their convictions are a matter of formality and the sentences are severe. The judiciary has become complicit in this tyranny. Turkey presents a false sense of adhering to the rule of law to the world. In this digital age of free-flowing information via social media and numerous networks, fake news, misinformation, and lies can be strongly advocated and promoted, thereby enabling dictators, mass murderers, and tyrants to perpetuate unjust rule with impunity. Turkey, therefore, cannot, in my respectful view, be separated or divorced from the global realities and geopolitical forces that pose an existential threat to almost every inhabitant of this world. Unfortunately, Turkey is also mired in this murky world of warfare and underworld of political intrigue, kidnappings, assassinations, and disappearances. Turkey, like other oppressive regimes, exists within a new world order underpinned by the rise of unilateralism, nationalism, religious factionalism, ethnicity, racism, tribalism, subjugation of minorities, violence against women, excesses of the extraction mining industry, and the irreversible environmental destruction of Mother Earth. Add to this the many other forms of discrimination and class oppression faced by the poor and dispossessed throughout many parts of the world, and the consequences of pandemics, climate change, and the dark cyber world of artificial intelligence. Turkey pretends to be better than many during these times of human failure on such a monumental global level. And it exists under that radar. Erdogan is thus able to survive thus far and pursue his grandiose dreams of world leadership for himself under this ominous global cloud of doom. As an aside, let me say that South Africa, my great country, offers a beacon of hope to the world by moving to a peaceful transition from one of humanity's worst oppressive systems, under the leadership of the courageous visionaries Oliver Tambo and Nelson Mandela. However, despite our internationally recognized constitution, which gave rise to our strong constitutional democracy, our rule of law is also under threat at this time. This is a matter for discussion on another day. Allow me to highlight some of the geopolitical tensions between the global superpowers that have impacted upon the struggles for self-determination, justice, peace, and human survival across the globe, and given Erdogan the room to maneuver. In all of these areas, the rule of law has been violated with impunity, under UN's prescripts, international law, and where there existed even domestic laws. Let me mention a few sites of such struggles, namely, 1, Western Sahara and their people struggle for self-determination. 2, the minority Tamil people struggle for justice and self-determination against a Sinhalese majority in Sri Lanka, having been subjected to genocide, war crimes, and much more from the ruling Buddhist Sinhalese militarized majority. 3, Myanmar and Burma, where the Rohingya people faced the same genocidal styled attacks, coincidentally from a Buddhist military-controlled democratic regime. 4, Palestine, of course, and its cries of "let me breathe," while the knee of Israel is firmly down on its neck. 5, Kashmir, which has little choice in determining its undecided future since the formation of the states of India and Pakistan more than 70 years ago. 6, Kurdistan, and many more parts in Europe. And lastly, I'll broadly refer to the Middle East, Africa, and Americas, and not to forget Yemen in the Middle East. In all of these areas, all of these countries, there are immense struggles for survival and self-determination that is ongoing. These just struggles are based on the rule of law, I must emphasize. They started with formations of elders, moving to community organizations, then to political parties, and finally to underground movements for liberation. These evolved in a progressive manner, taking decades in some cases and shorter periods in others. The rule of law was respected by the people fighting for justice, who embarked on programs of petitions, then forming delegations, reporting back, continuing negotiations, protesting, mobilizing, and resorting to nonviolence, civil disobedience, and then finally being driven to resort to armed struggle. In all of this, the United Nations General Assembly, the UN Security Council, and in the past few decades, even the UN Human Rights Council has attempted to resolve these conflicts by attempting to apply international law without success. And this is because of what I call, as what we often refer to as geopolitics. It is not the laws of or the evidence that is lacking to resolve the disputes in a just manner based on truth and fact. It is simply that, including the UN Charter on Human Rights and all the UN conventions that were passed and adopted, that these are unenforceable because of the veto powers that are held by what is commonly known as the superpowers. And as we know, if one of them does not agree with any resolution that is being sought to bring justice to bear on any country, nothing is passed. The hope of the new post-World War UN as a just arbiter of disputes was slowly eroded as a result and is all but non-existent, especially after the 9/11 events and also in this present third millennium. The world has been divided into voting blocs, with each group serving its own selfish interest, thereby giving rise to pliant, corrupt regimes that can wage war on its own people with impunity, committing gross violations of human rights, war crimes, and even genocide in furtherance of the strategic interests of their surrogate patrons, be it the United States of America, China, Russia, India, Britain, or some other power. These geopolitical power blocks have become international voting blocks, as seen within the UN and even the UN Human Rights Council. Erdogan seems to believe that Turkey can form a voting bloc within these greater blocs. In the final analysis, therefore, only the brave people of Turkey can reverse the tide against themselves and restore the rule of law for all its people and regain legitimacy in the eyes of the world as a truly great nation, achieving success and prosperity in a non-sectarian and just manner. In this quest, the good people of the world, no matter how small in number, will stand with all those persons in exile, in prison, and outside prison, and all those brave Turks fighting for justice, peace, prosperity, and unity for all in Turkey. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed, Krish. I'm glad you mentioned those points of dispute. You missed a few. I'm sorry you didn't mention the Uyghurs, for example, and the hideous things that are happening to them. We can come back to this.
Sure.
But now go to James Harrington, founder of the Texas Civil Rights Project, and he's been a human rights attorney, and he's now, I believe, involved in ministry as well. You have the floor, sir.
Thank you. I also want to join in commending the folks of Turkey for their bravery and courage, and actually for probably everybody on this panel today for their own personal courage and bravery. And it's an honor to be in this group with folks all around the world struggling for human rights. And I was thinking about Krish's comments too. And I think what we see in Turkey is reflecting what's going on around the world. We have the same struggle in the United States with Trump right now. And perhaps the thing that's going to save us is the judiciary. And the judiciary, we know, of course, theoretically and in practice, is critical, important, essential to the safe functioning of any democracy because it divides power. And with respect to the attack on the judiciary in Turkey and in the United States, in fact, Trump and Erdogan used the same language about enemies of the people. Both are demagogues. What's different, I think, is that with respect to Turkey and the United States and building a judiciary, is that we've had 250 years to do it. And I think that's been critical. It's set in stone in a sense, even though it's still not anywhere near perfect, it's still very malleable in terms of politics, but that is a tradition and an institution we have. Turkey, on the other hand, has only really had 10 years of experience with an independent judiciary and not enough time that it became institutionalized. I think, as Alp pointed out in his very detailed chart, historically in Turkey up until probably around 2000, the judiciary was nothing but a rubber stamp for the government and complicit in the government's torture and abuse of human rights. The history is sordid. But in 2002, during that bright decade, when it looked like Turkey was reforming and coming around as a human rights leader or establishing democracy in the Middle East. In fact, when President Obama was elected, Turkey was the first country he visited because of that promise of change and the democracy. So in that bright decade, I'll call it, there was a very considerable effort to reform and strengthen the judiciary and to make it independent, to put that into the culture. And the European Union, because Turkey at that time was doing this to some extent in order to join the European Union, involved itself greatly in the prodding, training, financial support of making the judiciary, helping to make the judiciary in Turkey independent. In fact, the goal that the EU embarked upon was training 10,000 lawyers and judges in the tradition of becoming independent, becoming a check on the executive, becoming a check on the legislative power. And I wrote a book, the Fethullah Gulen's trials in Turkey, but that caused me to look very closely at the judicial system and how it functioned. And part of writing that book was to go interview judges and prosecutors in Turkey, which I did, both at the trial level and also met at that time with the judges of the Constitutional Court. And what was really striking to me was their dedication and interest in really forming an independent judiciary, really bringing about this hope in Turkey to build a democracy in which the judiciary played an important role in curtailing power and protecting human rights, So there were constitutional amendments that were very important to this process. 2007, there were constitutional amendments that strengthened human rights and civil liberties in the Turkish constitution. Not a lot, but significantly. In Turkey, it's important to remember, had voluntarily assented to the jurisdiction of the European Court of Human Rights. So that was a check that on Turkey's power, enforcing judicial decisions. And Turkey actually abided by the decisions. When decisions came down against Turkey from the Human Rights Court, Turkey abided by them during this period. But the most important constitutional changes were in 2010. And that was very significant in terms of putting human rights up front very concretely in the Constitution of Turkey. We've heard some discussion already about the Constitution in South Africa, which is very good. It's one of the best in the world. And these constitutional amendments in Turkey mirrored a lot of those protections that we see in the South African Constitution and the human rights portions of the Constitution. So that happened in 2010. In fact, it was such an important election that people came back to Turkey, might have been on vacation or were actually making their annual pilgrimage to Mecca, came back in order to vote, and these amendments passed resounding. Then came, of course, 2016. And probably at this point, Erdogan has already figured out the danger to his power from these constitutional amendments, from being subject to the Court of Human Rights. And just dramatically, as Alp pointed out in detail over and over again, basically clamped down on the courts, putting judges in jail who made decisions with which he did not agree, firing clearly at least 4,000 judges, and sidelining all kinds of all sorts of people involved in the judicial system, including the prosecutors. So, and set up the parallel terrorist courts that Alp mentioned too. I mean, that's just, a rubber stamp again, and taking that power away from the other judges so that they could not act independently, and that these are basically what we would call kangaroo courts, just putting away people in jail with whom who Erdogan perceived to be enemies. This list of people who lost their jobs all throughout Turkey or were in prison has nothing to do with anything other than being against Erdogan's aggrandizement of power, which I agree with Alp is based upon money and aggrandizing money at the same time. So Now we have the 2017 constitutional amendments that basically barely pass, and the vote suppression, of course, in this. But these 2017 amendments, what they do is they water down, weaken, and do end runs around the Constitution as it was amended in 2010. And what I mean by end runs is, and Alpa's alluded to this too, is that one of the things the 2010 amendments did was to set up a mechanism so the Supreme Council of Judges and Prosecutors basically appoints or sets in process the appointments of judges and prosecutors. And the 2010 amendments had a way of breaking that out from the prior way that council was structured, so that it would have more independent input from councils, from associations of lawyers and like that. So it wasn't really just the government forming this, selecting the judges in the future. So what Erdogan does in the 2017 amendments is make that group, the independent council, smaller, and also have more appointment powers. So essentially, Erdogan and his party appoint the majority of that council that in turn appoints the judges, right? So that stripped away any attempt to move to an independent judiciary and made sure that everybody who was selected were cronies of his. The effect of the 2017 amendments has been, of course, to thoroughly weaken, virtually destroy any independence whatsoever in the judiciary, and to basically put back into place what existed prior to the year 2000, and that is the judiciary that is totally supine and will implement anything that Erdogan wants. What has also happened that is really tragic, in a sense, in the day-to-day lives of people, is that, of course, the vast majority of cases that are not decided, do not involve political or politics or political whims of Erdogan. The problem is the way he has gutted the judiciary and demoralized the judiciary and put in new appointments. The vast majority of these new appointments that are put in are very young lawyers, barely out of law school, maybe out 1 or 2 years. They're neophytes. They have no idea what it's like to go through trial processes. And all of a sudden they're judges. And they understand that the reason they're there is because of the government. And so not only do people who litigate in these courts face incompetence, which undermines the quality of civil justice, but they also know that they're not independent. And they also know that they have to make, every decision they make has to be something that the government approves. So this Turkey, the judiciary, the judicial system in Turkey is in a really sad situation. It's very unfortunate because there were so many years of promise. I hope that when Turkey returns to that long, hard path to democracy, that this memory of the 10 years will be remembered enough that in reforming Turkey, which hopefully happens and move it toward democracy, that this 10 years of promise, of dream, will become a reality. Having said that, and by way of wrapping this up, I want to go back to my earlier comment that I think that's what's happening in Turkey is not atypical of what's going on around the world right now, in this lack of respect for independent judiciary, not just lack of respect, but the concerted effort to undermine this democratic institution, this democratic idea that we have had for hundreds of years now. And I think it's important for everybody to stand up and support the efforts of the people in Turkey. I'm reminded of a quote from Robert Kennedy when he was running for president. Actually went to South Africa back in the days of apartheid. And in those days of apartheid, of course, meant that the universities were segregated. It meant that he had to choose, was he going to speak at a white university or was he going to speak at a Black university, African university? And so what Kennedy did is he chose to speak at a white university in Durban. And he did that because he understood that it was going to have to be the white people in power that helped bring about that change. And when he was there talking to the students, he made a really, I think, a really important pronouncement that I would like to share. And this comes out of a speech that he gave. It was at the University of Cape Town, June 6, 1966. The greatest danger in our time is timidity. Few are willing to brave the disapproval of their fellows, the censure of their colleagues, the wrath of their society. Moral courage is a rarer commodity than bravery in battle or great intelligence. Yet, moral courage is the one essential vital quality of those who seek to change a world that yields most painfully to change. Those with the moral courage to enter the moral conflict will find themselves with companions in every corner of the world. And it's an honor to be in this corner of the world with you and other corners of the world struggling for justice and human rights. Thank you.
Thank you, James Harrington, very, very much. I turn now to Esser Caracas, qui est un professeur de finance et de l'économie en France. J'imagine il veut parler en français, mais I think he probably is going to speak to us in English. Mr. Caracas, Professor Caracas.
Thank you very much, sir. Hello to everybody once again. The subject is Turkey. So, by beginning my speech, I'll have a very humble, very modest objection to the title, to the name of this convention. A very humble objection, because the name is Collapse of the Rule of Law in Turkey. If I am wrong, please correct me. The word collapse and this formula, collapse of the rule of law in Turkey, if I understand correctly, it does mean that this concept, the rule of law, did jadis existed in Turkey, and for miscellaneous reasons, it no more exists. I think that's a misconception of Turkish legal system. The rule of law in Turkey did never exist in the past, does not exist today. I'm very pessimistic. I'm sorry for this, excuse me. And probably it will never exist tomorrow. I will try to explain why I say the things in this way. I admit that the days we are passing through is the really worst imaginable days of the history of the rule of law in Turkey. But that's just a question of degree. That's just a question of degree. It was not something brilliant in the past. So I can remember what we lived in the country since my childhood. Those days are the worst days, imaginable worst days. Tomorrow never knows, but I'm not very optimistic for tomorrow. I will explain why. I'm an economist. I have an approach to the concept of to the legal concepts. So I will use economic terminology to explain the non-existence, to describe or to explain the non-existence of the rule of law in Turkey. For the lawyers, I think this presentation looks a little bit funny, but rule of law is a good. Like all other goods, rule of law is a good, like a car or like the defense. Rule of law is a good because it is produced within the country. And with the economist, we call something produced within the country, we call it a good. There are private goods like the car. There are also public goods like justice, like rule of law. Rule of law also is produced by the country, by the citizens, by the institutions. So it's a good, but it is not a private good, it's a public good. But at the essence of the thing, for a good to be produced, this good, a private good or a public good, it doesn't change. For a good to be supplied, to be produced, I mean the rule of law, we need a demand for this. We need a demand for a good to be produced. It is the same logic for private goods and also for the public goods. For example, let's think about a car. If a car is not demanded by the citizens, there will be no supply of this kind of car. No demand, no supply. I think in Turkey, Turkish electorate does not demand in sufficient quantity the concept of the rule of law. But this lack of demand by the electorate, by the citizens, is not a problem of ignorance. There's not a problem of, I don't know, because most of the people are illiterate. No. The economists call it rational ignorance. For you to demand a good, public or private good, once you consume it, you have to be an expectation of utility of this. When you consume a good, when you consume a smartphone, you have an utility. The rule of law is like a smartphone. When you consume the rule of law in a country, you have to have an utility of this. But if we make a very, I'm sorry for the term, a scientific dissection of the society, scientific dissection, because our constatation is that the society, as I won't say as a whole, but at least more than 80%, they don't have a private interest in the production of the rule of law in the country. So they don't demand it. If something is not generating an utility, you don't demand it. Turkey is a civil law country, so normally the parliament has to produce the rule of law, but the parliament sees that the electorate does not demand this, so they don't supply it. It was the case for yesterday. That's the case today, and probably it will be the case for tomorrow. We are passing through very catastrophic days concerning the rule of law. But if the polls are not very, very biased, we see that the ruling party has at least 40% of the votes. 40%. It's something unimaginable, unthinkable. But that's the truth. That's the reality. I think that's because my look to the problem and their look to the problem is not the same. For them, the production of the rule of law brings them a disutility. Me, I am expecting the production of the rule of law for myself, for my family. But for a huge majority of the country, even from the opposition side, the production of the rule of law will not generate an utility for them. If you have a question, I can try to explain it. The non-existence of the rule of law is not the business of a small minority, let's say 20-25%, who is oppressing the society, no. The people themselves, they are not demanding this. I think the only way to overcome this situation, the only way to overcome this vicious circle, what I call it a vicious circle, this rule of law, this public good is not demanded. Not because it is not demanded, it is not produced. Because it is not produced, it is not demanded. So it's a kind of vicious circle. The only way to overcome this vicious circle is Turkish full membership to EU. I will try to explain it by an old Greek term, not Greek term, it's a Latin term, but used in Greek terminology, in Greek ex-theaters, ex-tragedies, Deus ex machina. The existence of the rule of law can only be valid in Turkey by Deus ex machina. So it means some superpower bringing it without being produced by the infrastructure. And this system is only the EU membership of Turkey. The EU membership of Turkey to EU. Just why? I see this story since 30 years as a professor of economics. So in the last 20 years, I had very serious problems with Turkish people. And I always say the following: whatever the conditions are, whatever the concessions they demand, we have to be a part of it. If we are not a part of it, the future will be a catastrophe, a disaster for us. And I am very unhappy, but I think I was right. Yeah, I don't know. Mr. Harrington, Mr. James Harrington, thank you very much. He mentioned a golden age of Turkish judiciary, for example, probably between 2000 to 2010. Mm-hmm. I'm married with a lawyer, so she was a judge, so I know a little bit the situation among the judges, among the judiciary. Even in the golden ages of this, between 2000 to 2010, we were making some surveys among the judges. And we were asking the following question: if in a case you are in a dilemma between what we call the state interest and the highest values of the rule of law, which one you will prefer? 70% of them, they said, we will prefer the interest of states. Even in the really golden age of the judiciary. I am pessimistic, but I'm also realistic, I think. So what I say to all my Turkish friends, let's do the impossible. Let's do the impossible to overcome those problems with EU. I am living in France, and in French, we have a perfect idiom. L'impossible n'est pas français.
L'impossible n'est pas français.
Thank you very much, dear colleagues. Thank you very much.
Merci bien, Monsieur le Professeur Karakas. Time is short, and I will try to cut my remarks down, which I prepared as much as I can. I start by praising Mr. Erdogan and his first years as Prime Minister and Mayor of Paris and so on. He did a good job. I say other achievements included temporarily winding down a 30-year conflict with Turkey's 15 million strong Kurdish minority and accepting large numbers of refugees from Bashar al-Assad's Syria. Then I change. In 2013, however, when a corruption scandal broke involving Erdogan and his cabinet, no one was charged. Judges, prosecutors, and police were quickly reassigned. Fethullah Gulen, cleric and founder of the Gulen movement, who had supported Erdogan when they both sought membership in the European Union, which Professor Karakas just mentioned, and further democratization of Turkey, broke with him that year, and subsequently, as we all know, was called a terrorist by Mr. Erdogan. The American academic Sophia Pandya, who's actually speaking at this conference, I'm delighted to hear, has described the Gulen movement this way: a Sufism-inspired civil society humanitarian organization, which thousands of educational, charitable, and cultural organizations globally. Gulen has denied any personal institutional involvement in the attempted coup. If there are officers among the coup plotters who consider themselves sympathizers of the Gulen movement, they committed treason against the unity of Turkey for participating in an event where their own citizens lost their lives, close quote. I will skip parts here. Unfortunately for Turkey and the world, Erdogan used the attempted coup to subvert democracy, which Turks had defended with their lives over 93 years, to achieve increasingly totalitarian goals. Like Putin in Russia, Erdogan has since sought to create some formal but shallow institutions of a democracy. Research by Burak Bekdil in November this year indicates, listen to this, colleagues, 38% of Turks consider that they no longer belong in Turkey. The Economist last week indicated that Berat Albayrak, Erdogan's son-in-law, nearly ruined the economy of Turkey before finally quitting. I was going to quote from the Stockholm Center for Freedom, but I'll skip that so we can get to hopefully some discussion. Let me, a forum on Turkey hosted by the Anatolian Heritage Federation was held in Canada's Parliament in early 2018. Alex Neave, the Secretary General of Amnesty International, pointed out that AI's rep in Turkey was in prison. He said that's never happened in Amnesty's history, but consider this comment by the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights, Zaid al-Hussein, quote, "The numbers are staggering. Nearly 160,000 people arrested during an 18-month state of emergency, 152,000 civil servants dismissed, many totally arbitrarily, teachers, judges, and lawyers dismissed or prosecuted, journalists arrested, media outlets shut down, and websites blocked. Turkish authorities reportedly detained some 100 women who were pregnant, now mothers, on the grounds that they were associates of their husbands, who were suspected of being connected to terrorist organizations. Some were detained with their children and others violently separated from their children. This is outrageous, cruel, and has nothing whatsoever to do with making Turkey safer. I might say that I happen to think that the UN High Commissioner Hussein, who's now left his post, is one of the best human rights high commissioners the UN has ever had. We heard a lot today about the unleashing of the campaign to destroy the rule of law. Fear of prosecution paralyzed the judiciary and academia. Those purged or branded as Gulenists were penalized repeatedly, shunned by employers and deprived of their passports. The judiciary lost its independence and became Erdogan's main weapon to pursue perceived opponents, as many of you have said today. Judges and prosecutors were held in prisons. Many were dismissed from their positions without fair process, their assets frozen. They cannot leave Turkey, and the association that independently represented them has been administratively disbanded. Oh yeah, the Turkish High Judicial Council failed to serve as a guarantor of the independence of the judiciary in the face of other branches of the state, became an extension of Erdogan's authority, promoting or allowing all abuses being made. Its suspension in December of 2016 by the European Network of the Council for the Judiciary illustrates the disappearance of the rule of law in Turkey. With a bare 51.3% of the vote in April 2017, the Yes campaign won Turkey's historic referendum on constitutional amendments. Ruling by emergency decree, Erdogan's government silenced independent media, restricted public debate, and jailed critical journalists and leaders of the pro-Kurdish opposition. As you all know, and I think some of you have said, the parliamentary system in Turkey was transferred into an executive presidency, one-man rule. Human dignity, the rule of law, and the judiciary was threatened when Erdogan was given power to suspend ministers, legislate by decree, dissolve and reconstitute parliament, and control judicial appointments. Freedom of the press vanished. Writers, editors, critical of the government were fired and replaced by government propagandists. Staff on the few newspapers struggling to remain independent were jailed. It's now a crime to insult the president, the flag, the republic, or the nation. Erdogan's team of lawyers, prosecutors check social media. Police arrive at critics' homes. More than 46,000 people have been prosecuted under this charge. Many lost jobs and were imprisoned. About 15 million Turkish citizens were caught up in the criminal justice process as witnesses or defendants. There are 7.5 million active criminal cases in Turkey. In refusing to accept the Universal Periodic Review's recommendation, I skipped that. You're probably all aware of that, but the president refused to acknowledge the key issues in that Universal Periodic Review, and but in refusing to accept the recommendations, Turkey's justice system will remain under political control of the presidency, the AKP. The prolonged detention of human rights defenders, Osman Kavala and Selahattin Demirtas, I'm sorry how I pronounce the names, illustrates the impact of political court decisions along with Turkey's readiness to flout the binding judgment of the European Court of Human Rights. So in conclusion, Turkish citizens deserve to live in a functioning democracy with the rule of law. Erdogan seems determined to remove all elements of Ataturk's secular state. Turkey's global friends can only hope that he will accept the real lessons of the 2016 events instead of terming it a gift from God, and move back towards national reconciliation, democracy, and the rule of law. Thank you. I don't know how much longer we have for discussion. Maybe, would anyone like to make a comment based on what they heard from any of the other speakers until we run out of time? Who would like to go first?
Let me just make a quick comment.
Sure.
I think at the end, having heard the evidence from the four of us, you passed judgment, but you didn't pass sentence. But it's okay, as a good judge that you are. I just want to quickly say that Professor Karakas is quite on point about the economic impact on a country. And I just want to clarify that the rule of law is an important structure, a broad concept that provides for good governance, if one had to talk about it in corporate terms, but it provides for a balanced running of a country, essentially to enable the economy to work for the benefit of the people. And the rule of law, apart from keeping the legislature and the executive in check, it is the basis upon which people are able to protect excesses, challenge corruption, and any plundering of state assets. And that is why I think the topic is important, and I can understand from an economist's point of view. I would agree that the economy is the first and most important thing for the good benefit of all citizens in a country. And a good democratic system gives the mechanism, provides the prism within which that economy can be balanced. And that is why, with the collapse of the rule of law in Turkey, Erdogan is going to collapse, and he would never be able to survive because he cannot wage wars as he is doing, spend monies without a functioning good democratic system that will allow for the economy to flourish without fear and favor amongst the citizens. I'll just stop there. Thank you.
Thank you. Would anyone else like to comment on what Krish has just said?
Krish, I'm sorry. Thank you very much, David. Krish mentioned my name. Thank you. I thank him very much. But I never said that the economy is the first. What I try to do is to try to explain the absence of the rule of law by using economic terminology. I never mentioned the economy within this, but I can do it in the sense that you didn't ask why Turkish electorate, they don't demand the rule of law. For example, in Turkey we have about 60 millions, not 16, 606, 60 millions of voters, and only 1 million are paying direct taxes. A rule of law means paying direct taxes. If you don't have enough income, you don't pay it, but you have to have a link between the citizen, between you and the Ministry of Finance. Only 1 million people. So suppose that I am about 40% of the employment is an underground employment in Turkey. Suppose that I am the head of a political party and I said, if you vote me, if I'll be the government, I'll bring to the Turkey one by one all the principles of democracy and the rule of law existing in UK, for example.
Well, okay.
The maximum of votes I can anticipate will be 5%, never more.
Okay, but I have a degree in economics too, and I worked in it as an economist briefly. So let's not get this off onto the economic issue. The rule of law. Anyone who wants to make a comment now on the rule of law? Anyone? How about Alp? What would you like to say, Alp?
Yes. 10 years ago, with a colleague, with an academic, we visited Turkey to interview Dr. Karakash, and he said the same thing that I understand better now. He said that when there is no demand, the supply will not be there. And Arzu Yıldız, a panelist in the previous session, made a comment some time ago. He said that Erdogan personally did not torture anybody. Erdogan personally did not jail anybody. It is all collaborators within the government and in the society who are facilitating this persecution. So combining the two, I think it is a matter of collective consciousness. The demand has to be there, and the demand has to be there somehow. I think for the organizations like AST, ourselves, and other organizations, I think our question is how to help raise this consciousness in the society so there is demand. I think we should look at that question rather than just focusing on what Erdogan is doing.
Okay, James, James, would you like to add something? You haven't spoken? I guess not. Okay, well then, I don't know how long we've got. Do you know, Alp, how much time we have to discuss?
I am not sure if Hafsa is online. She can help us.
I'm here. I haven't gone anyway. But I think Jim was just speaking, but he was muted. Jim, I think you want to say something.
Oh, please.
Yeah, you know, I'm at heart a community organizer, and I think that I'm listening to a lot of this stuff, but it really involves community organizing, and you only need to, and that's what brings about the change. If you want to use the economic analogy, that's what brings about the change. And you don't have to organize 50% of the people either. You only have to organize 10, 15% of the people to make the change. And I think that's where I mean, we can talk about this for a long time, and we have talked about it for a long time, but the really hard work is organizing the people to make the change. And I think that's a tribute to the dialogue, you know, is working on this organizing from the outside, but it's a long struggle. It's going to be a long struggle.
David, I think we're very good to finish in 15 minutes. Would you mind if I ask a general question? Maybe all the speakers could contribute. I have a question. They all briefly mentioned about international approach, international perception about Turkey. Ahmet Altan, along with other hundreds of journalists, are in jail. They're all in jail, and we hear some comments, some condemnations, criticism from different international organizations, including European, Court of Human Rights, etc. But even though European Court of Human Rights, along with other impactful intragovernmental international organizations, can actually do something, concretely to urge Turkish government to release them. There are some I don't know reports, but it's not a concrete thing, I believe. Why do you think that happens? Why Ahmet Altan, Selahattin Demirtas, Dait Karaca, Ünhanım Büşra Erdal are still incarcerated despite all the pressure from the international human rights community?
Who wants to go first? Well, you can.
I'll give it a try. I want to just go back to my presentation and looking at the situation from South Africa and our experience of overpowering and eliminating apartheid and so forth. One can say quite safely that if democratic countries in the world want to intervene and impose, say, sanctions, adopt campaigns to disinvest from a country and employ blockades and so forth, they would do so only when their own national and personal interests is at stake. The collapse of the apartheid regime in South Africa was mainly because the economic interests of the West were affected. We have all our gold mines and other minerals and various other needs that would have been threatened. Even the sea route around the Cape might have been at risk. So countries will go to the UN and exert pressure if their interests are affected. In a nutshell, until Turkey encroaches and creates tension and problems, if it cuts off the gas lines that Russia supplies parts of Europe, or if they sink some US carrier in the Black Sea or wherever, then the world bodies will come into the picture and use the instruments available in the UN structures and so on. But until then, as long as their personal interests are not affected, and in some ways, Erdogan is supporting some of their conservative repressive policies as well. So he serves also their purposes. And I don't want to repeat what I said in my little talk, but this is one short answer I can give. Thank you.
Can I jump in on this? I would like you all to know that on every Thursday afternoon, about a number of us from 3 faith communities, Christian, Muslim, and Jewish, stand across the street from the Chinese embassy here in Ottawa, holding up signs saying "Free the Uyghurs" and "1 million Uyghurs" that we're talking about East Turkestan, okay? And yet, my friend from South Africa, how could it possibly be that South Africa, when it came down to casting their vote with those who were objecting to the way these people in East Turkestan are being treated, killed for their organs, forced labor, making products, all kinds of hideous things that are happening there. How on earth could the South African government vote with the government in Beijing on that issue? To me, as a huge admirer of South Africa, I was dismayed when I saw that. Can you explain that to a simple Canadian who's shivering here in the snow today?
I can assure you that's a wonderful question, and it's a very fair one. South Africa hasn't just failed the people in East Turkestan. They have let down many other people who are struggling for justice around the world and for self-determination. The very same system of oppression and even those groups that supported the liberation struggle in South Africa have been let down now. Over the past 15 years, South Africa's economy has been subjugated to the needs of the big superpowers. So the votes that are taking place in the UN and even at the UNHRC when South Africa was a sitting member were based on the vested economic interests of the country, and they did not exercise that great independence that Nelson Mandela showed the world. They actually played ball with those who are supporting their economic survival. And South Africa is going through a bad economic patch. Through corruption over the past 10 years, we are in a terrible state, as we refer to it as state capture, by groups within the ruling party as well that have really devastated our economy. So at the moment, if South Africa is to vote in favor of the Sri Lankan government against the Tamil minority whose forces helped train the ANC underground fighters before, they will vote to let the Sri Lankan government get away because China exerts a major influence in over South Africa and its economy. That's just one example. And then sometimes the US may play a role to try to pull South Africa away, but that doesn't work. So basically, the power blocks, and it's all down to economies and economics. If that is not the issue, then South Africa would be voting according to its great name that it earned for itself through Nelson Mandela and the past reputation of the African National Congress that was so great, with freedom fighters fighting for justice, standing up for all the freedom-loving people in the world, from Palestine to Cuba and everywhere, and Venezuela and so on. At the moment, South Africa is clinging to, in a sense, surviving because its financial institutions and economic policies are dependent on external forces, mainly the influence of China. Thank you.
Oh, well, thank you so much. Wonderful. Do you want us to?
Well, I hope I won't get arrested. I'm sure I won't.
Let's pray for that. Let's nobody get arrested. Pray for that.
No, but we have the rule of law here. Thank you.
Yes. And can I make one more comment to my friend from South Africa? As I say, I've been to South Africa many times. I've have nothing but respect for what Nelson Mandela, I love that man. How come when jobs are so short in South Africa, how did you allow your garment industry to completely move to China?
You know, I must point out, and many things that we spoke about, and I want to assure Professor Caracas that he didn't go far enough, maybe because of this topic, but I'm with him on the facts that everything in this world is operating on the basis of the economy and sound economic policies. The rule of law is a small addendum. It should protect the economy. And this is my argument. I'm with him. And I want to say to him that the rule of law is a minor issue at the end of the day, but it's integral for good governance and to manage a country so that criminals can be prosecuted. So when we talk about, to deal with the question that you've posed, the policies that South Africa adopted post-2000 and around that time was such that it was based on not protecting the hard-won victories of liberation, but the neoliberal policies of the economies of the world began to infiltrate, and the policy makers in South Africa, the economists, were split. There were progressive groups that said we must protect our homegrown economies and the industries. And there were others who said, no, you've got to open it up to the so-called global village. The World Trade Organization, I must say, is a terrible, terrible organization. Third world countries, developing countries are at their mercy because they control through the IMF and the World Bank, all the outflows of monies, and investments into this country are made to be a criteria so that you open up your economy and you will then find you buying clothing from China at 1/3 of the price that the local workers in our factories will produce, because, and then you're faced with, I'm taking a very simplistic example, then you're faced with a local industry shutting down because there's no market. But external markets come in and drive your economy and drive your workforce and the workers of the country into a state of unemployment because of the influx of goods and services that come from outside. And that, in a nutshell, and I'm not, I would call myself a student of economics, but certainly this neoliberal policy has destroyed our economy. Our clothing industry in South Africa was one of the best. It is absolutely destroyed because of, as we had to deal with it now, the influx of cheap goods coming from outside, and mainly through China, for example. Thank you.
Thank you.
So, David, I think Jim needs to leave in a few minutes, and I guess we can also wrap it up, right? If all the other speakers do not have anything to add.
May I say something?
Please, yes.
I think Jim touched upon a very important point. What really makes a difference, and he has to know because he is on the ground in the field, helping people make a difference. And community organization is one of the things that actually makes a difference. Raising consciousness through education and other means makes a difference. I think in events like this and in organizations like this, we need to talk more about the future that we want, our vision, and also what is shown to be actually working to get there, rather than talking about what is wrong. I think we need to spend more time and effort and energy on what we want and how to get there.
Well said, indeed. Well, yes. Anybody else want the last word?
Thank you very much.
Okay. Yes. Thank you all. Thank you all very, very much. And thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
I would like to thank this great moderator of today. And then thanks, for joining us. Thanks for this great, amazing discussion. And one more thing, I would like to ask all the audience to go on to the comments part on YouTube. There is a survey. If you could please fill in that survey form, then we can see your ideas, your suggestions, your comments for the next events that we can get better. Thank you for your contribution, because our audience also amazing. They have been watching us since 10 a.m. today in New York time for hours and hours, and I see their comments, their enthusiasm about this important cause. And thanks all.
Thank you. Thank you so much, everybody.
Hafsa.
Bye for now. Bye.
Bye.